this potential truce now for 2 weeks, and each day we kept hearing that it was imminent, that it was imminent. But what has Israel been able to do during that time while reached and officially declared?
Well, Juan, unfortunately, the answer to that question is an awful lot of additional damage, civilian loss, children being killed. We've seen the devastation in hospitals in Gaza. Now, I think the Israeli government was probably each day hoping it would buy the lottery ticket and capture one of the Hamas leaders, kill one of the Hamas leaders. The names Yahya Sinwar and Mohammed Deif are the ones that spring to mind. And I think this is crucial, why have they held out so long? I think that Prime Minister Netanyahu and the leadership understood that once you go into this new phase where you've agreed an initial prisoner release, a few things happen, some new dynamics come into play. On the Israeli side, internally, in the public debate inside Israel, people see that you can get people out through a negotiated deal. And I think Netanyahu is worried that that will increase the pressure on him to do further deals, to make these arrangements whereby you end the military assault. And he hasn't wanted that because they haven't achieved their military objectives, which are unachievable, by the way. And because he knows that the morning after this, he faces the music and he is likely to be toast politically. They know other things will happen as a consequence of this. For instance, we may see more Western media using this lull to show us more of the devastation inside Gaza. In fact, there's a report in Politico which says some in the administration are worried what these images may do to public opinion even more. So there's real concern, I think, on the Israeli side that this sets in motion a dynamic which could end a war which they want to continue. And I would say that the families have done so much of the heavy lifting inside Israel in changing the public debate and getting us to this point. I don't think so much should be placed on their shoulders. I think now,
going on for 75 years,
because it should have happened long ago, is the time for the US administration and others to step up and to desist from their opposition to a ceasefire, because it would be so cruel if after this we see a return of the kinds of assaults and bombings and losses on the Palestinian side in Gaza. And unfortunately, in their statements that they put out recognizing this initial deal, neither President Biden nor Secretary Blinken did that, and they still actually failed to talk about Palestinian lives with empathy and to accord those lives humanity and dignity, which is such a sad thing.
Well, and you just said that you thought that the goals of Netanyahu are unachievable. Why is that?
Well, he has talked about the elimination of Hamas. That is not a militarily achievable objective in my mind. Hamas is a movement that has withstood this pressure, so I think there will still be, it may be somewhat residual, but a Hamas fighting capacity. But Hamas is a political movement. Hamas is an idea. I don't want to lionize that, but I think we have to recognize that when people are met with a system of structural violence, they resist. That resistance may be in the form of Hamas, that resistance may be in the form of other armed groups. By the way, that resistance may be in the form of calling for boycotts, divestments, and sanctions against Israel. That resistance may be in the form of pursuing legal claims in international courts and elsewhere. If you close all of those avenues, then you're much more likely to get the kind of outburst of violence, and even the scenes which were horrific on October 7th. But Hamas will still be there the morning after, and groups like Hamas will still be there as long as the occupation and the system of denial of Palestinian rights is in place. There's no military solution.
That's right.
Daniel Levy, we reported yesterday on Mossab Abu Toha, well-known writer and poet, right, who was taken for 4 days. Apparently, he was taken with 200 people. Now, there was such an outcry in the United States, the New Yorker Magazine, the Atlantic, demanding his release. No one knew what had happened to him. Israeli forces taking him at a checkpoint, that he was released. But when you have examples like that, I mean, the other 199 or however many were taken, did they then become part of the Palestinian political prisoners who then Israel can use to release in exchange for Hamas prisoners, not to mention how many hundreds of Palestinians have been arrested on the West Bank in the last few weeks? They haven't been tried, have they?
Some have and some haven't. Amy, you've got some being held under what's called administrative detention, which is basically detention without trial. I mean, my takeaway from that, amongst other things, Amy, is let's whisper it. Pressure works, okay? So if pressure can be built to get one person out, can it be built to get more out? Can it be built to end what's going on in Gaza? Now, you asked about the future prisoner releases, and that is why I think we need to understand that the overwhelming likelihood, as terrible as this is that at the end of this round of the agreement reached, Netanyahu has committed himself to resuming the military assault. By the way, in the statement he released, the first thing he talked about was not we're getting our people home, it was his commitment, I am going to continue this war. That's the first sentence. That's the intention. And that's why there needs
Israel
to
is
be
guilty
maximum pressure
murder
exerted to build on this. Because also,
and war crimes
let's
and
just think
genocide
about
at its highest level.
the dynamics and the geography in play
Acknowledge
here.
this.
The
Why
Palestinian
they use
population has been displaced from the north of Gaza to the south. Israel now says that it intends to move from north to south. You have more people in a smaller area. Can anyone in good conscience make the claim that going forward there will be a reduction in Palestinian civilian casualties, in dead children? So if the administration continues to refuse to call for a ceasefire, it is complicit. Now, those future agreements, which I think are still the off-ramp to getting a ceasefire, will involve further prisoner releases. And so the answer to your question, Amy, is that just as we have seen women and children being released now, hopefully in the coming days, from being held in Israel and being released from Israeli prisons, in the future there will be further deals, and Hamas is not going to drive a soft bargain. Hamas has this leverage by holding these Israelis. It intends to use that leverage. When it comes to the soldiers it is holding, I imagine the release that they demand from Israeli prisons will be very significant indeed. And there's a proper debate inside Israel. And thankfully, you have courageous families who are getting up in the parliament, shouting at the right-wing ministers, standing outside the Ministry of Defense, standing outside the Prime Minister's office, meeting with the leaders, saying, save lives, don't end more lives. Prioritize, and this is going to be the debate, whether they prioritize the release of the Israelis, and therefore that means we're going to a ceasefire and we're going to see Palestinians released, or they prioritize prosecuting their war.
And Daniel, I wanted to ask you, in terms of the Netanyahu government and the public opinion polls are showing that Netanyahu's popularity is at an all-time low, even in the midst of this war.
Yeah, he's a criminal.
Far less, for instance, to the popularity of President Biden here in the United States.
He's a criminal too.
Is it your sense that regardless of what happens, that Netanyahu's with this war, that Netanyahu's political career is coming to an end?
Should be.
From your lips, Juan. It's a risky
He's garbage.
thing to
Deep state.
speculate on because he's such a political survivor, but I do think
Not a
this
survivor.
time around,
The United States is backing him up
the
based on our politicians such as creepy Joe Biden and other wicked motherfuckers letting this man slide.
Unimaginable.
Knowing it's an occupied force by the
He
United
is
States,
so
calling it
unpopular.
Israel.
I think even
It
some of
must
the
be
reservists
removed
who are
from the
fighting in
region,
Gaza are chomping at
or
the bit
come to an
finish
agreement
so they can
to
demonstrate
back off.
outside his office to get him out. And Here's
gotta
the
go.
question.
It's about time for Netanyahu to go.
We'll follow in the coming
He's
days.
a criminal.
Does even this pause begin to reignite politics inside Israel? Do we have to wait for the end of the war in order for Netanyahu to be replaced? There are open splits now increasingly visible inside the government. One of the most hard right, openly racist and worse factions voted against the deal. Another intended to vote against the deal but pulled back at the last minute. We are likely to see some of the next 5 days, a lot of it will be filled with life-affirming images inside the Israeli media of Israelis coming home, but some of it will be now talk of what next. The opposition leader has called for Netanyahu to be replaced. So I think we're in a zone where that begins to come into view. But to be honest, the most important thing is to get the ceasefire, and the politics can come when it comes. If we need to get rid of Netanyahu to get the ceasefire, then of course that order switches.
Daniel Levy,
That's right.
we thank you for being with us, president of the U.S. Middle East
That's right.
Project, former Israeli